Hi, welcome back to Dad Drinks, where every pour tells a story. I'm Dad, and tonight's story, we're going to talk about the Rat Pack in Old Las Vegas. But before we do that, we have to have our pour. We got to get our drink ready. And what I did was I kind of looked at what all the Rat Pack guys, what they used to drink. And interestingly enough, Sammy Davis Jr., his big drink was the Japanese Highball. So what we have is some Japanese whiskey. Now, usually a highball is just with soda water, club soda, but not Sammy. Sammy liked a little bit of zing. So we're going to use some ginger ale. So what you want is you want a highball glass. I have this really nice ice. It would have looked a lot better if it would all stayed together because it's these really long, thin pieces, rectangular ice, and fit perfectly inside of this highball glass. So you want to fill your highball glass with some ice. Then we're just going to take 2 ounces here of Japanese whiskey, which might just kill my Japanese whiskey. Just going to pour that in. Then you're just going to top it off. And whether you're using club soda or ginger ale, whatever you want to use, just going to top it off there. There you go. You got your Japanese highball. Well, the thing is that Sammy Davis Jr. was such a Japanese highball guy that he actually became the first spokesperson for Suntory Whisky, which is the big whiskey company in Japan, even before Bob Harris, who was the character that Bill Murray plays in the movie Lost in Translation, who is basically in Japan because they have hired him to do all kinds of advertising for Suntory. But that's digressive. And actually, now what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is the Rat Pack. So if you're a millennial, maybe even Gen Z, a late era Gen X, you know who the Brat Pack is, right? So the Brat Pack was all those kids who were in the John Hughes movies, guys like Judd Nelson and Andrew McCarthy, Emilio Estevez, the Ali Sheedy and Anthony Michael Hall, all those guys. And they were known as the Brat Pack. Well, before the Brat Pack, back in the 60s, there was the Rat Pack. And the main members, the 5 members of the Rat Pack, were basically Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, who was an actor and happened to be the brother-in-law of John F. Kennedy, and then Joey Bishop. And the Rat Pack initially started back in the 50s, and it was run at that time, like the main guy was Humphrey Bogart, and all these people would come over, all these singers and actors would come over and hang out at Bogart's house, including Frank Sinatra. But it was people like Judy Garland and Harry Belafonte and all those other people. But then as they started to get older, Frank kind of took it over. And in 1960, Peter Lawford and Frank Sinatra were good friends. Peter Lawford brings to Frank and says, hey, I got this movie script that I've been reading. And that movie was Ocean's 11, the original Ocean's 11, not the remake with Clooney and Brad Pitt and Matt Damon. This was the original. And in the original movie, so Lawford comes and talks to Frank about it and says to Frank Sinatra, you should really be in this movie. I think they were thinking of trying to actually get Humphrey Bogart to play the Danny Ocean part. But Bogart, by that point, had just gotten a little bit too old to play that. It was really starting to suffer from his lung cancer and wasn't really going to be able to do that. So they kind of got Frank Sinatra to do it. And then Frank went out and Frank talked to the rest of his Rat Pack friends besides Peter Lawford and talked to the other 4 and said, hey, you should be part of this. And they all became part of it. So the thing about the Rat Pack is that when the 5 of them got together to go film Ocean's 11, Ocean's 11 was filmed on site in Las Vegas. And in the original Ocean's 11, Matt Damon and George Clooney and Brad Pitt, they only decided to try to take down 3 casinos. You know, the three that are all owned by Andy Garcia's character. No, Frank and his cronies, the original Ocean's 11. Oh no, they decided to take down 5. And not only were they taking down 5 casinos, but they were going to do it on the busiest night of the year, New Year's Eve. You know, in the remakes, they're doing it during a boxing match, but in Ocean's 11, they're doing it on New Year's Eve. And they're going to take down the Sahara, the Riviera, the Desert Inn, the Sands, and the Flamingo. Now, if you know your history of Las Vegas, you know that out of all of those, only 2 of them are left, and that's the Sahara and the Flamingo. And the Sahara has kind of changed a lot from what it was back in old Vegas times. And Flamingo is now actually part of, you know, this huge entertainment complex right there in the center of the Strip, the Link. But back then, they were all separate, you know, casinos in 1960. And one of the things that when they got out there was, since Frank, Dean, and Sammy were all singers, and Joey Bishop was a comedian, they made a deal with the Sands. And they said, hey, while we're out here filming this movie, we'll come and do shows. And I've read this whole thing about how they did that. They would do shows every night at 8 p.m. and at midnight. So 2 shows a night in the showroom, the main showroom at the Sands. And then they would leave after their midnight show, get to set somewhere around 3 in the morning, because if you've watched the original Ocean's 11, a lot of that movie takes place at night in Vegas with, you know, the lights and the Strip and everything else. And they would film basically from 3 a.m. to sunrise. And if they had to do some day shots, they just do that after the sun came up. But then they would all just leave probably around 8, 9 in the morning, go home, do whatever, get some sleep, and then do it all again the next night at the Sands. And remember, on top of everything else, these guys weren't teetotalers. Okay, we already talked about Sammy. Sammy's big drink was the highball. Frank was Jack and Coke. Sinatra did Jack and Cokes. Occasionally he'd drink a martini. But if he was up on stage and he had a glass in his hand, it was a rocks glass, and it was going to have Jack and Coke in it. Of course, Dean Martin, we all know, you know, he has that history. Dean Martin was probably the heaviest drinker out of all of them. And Dean's drink of choice was the Rusty Nail, which is scotch with Drambuie in it. So if you saw Dean, Dino standing up there with a glass in his hand, that's probably what it had in it. Peter Lawford, you know, he was basically just a sidekick. He wasn't doing a lot of the shows and stuff. He was just kind of hanging around with them because his main thing was as an actor. He wasn't really a singer. He didn't really do the Joey Bishop stuff where he was a comedian. He was mostly just an actor, so he would just kind of hang out with them. But his big thing was just Manhattans, which we talked about last week, and then martinis. And then Joey Bishop, who was the comedian of the group. So, you know, Frank, Dean, and Sammy would do their songs, and one of the things was that they wouldn't have like a set list. They would just kind of do whatever hit their fancy at the moment, and that's what they would sing. And, you know, they take requests from the audience, do whatever, and they do that. And then in between their songs, that's when Joey would come out, and Joey would do like comedy bits with them. And then Joey would kind of, you know, shuffle off the side of the stage. And that's how they worked it while they were out there. So, you know, that was back in 1960. You know, Vegas started essentially the main part of Vegas, the Strip, 1946, when Bugsy Siegel builds the Flamingo, which, again, one of the casinos they're going to take down in the movie. But Vegas was still, right up until probably the early 1960s, was a lot of, you know, wise guys and mobsters, and, you know, the mafia was running Vegas. And, you know, it was a little bit seedy. Maybe you didn't want to be there all the time. You'd go there and maybe see a show, but it was still kind of, you know, questionable. In 1960, after they, you know, went there and the Rat Pack really took over Vegas, that's when corporations started moving in and changing it from the old Vegas to kind of what we see now. And like I said, when you go there now, the only 2 hotels you're going to find are the Sahara and the Flamingo. The Riviera and the Sands, along with like the dunes, they were blowing up, imploded, so that mostly so that Wynn could build stuff. Steve Wynn, or I believe where the Sands used to be is now where Venetian is. And then Riviera was down The north end of the strip up by the Sahara and the Riviera is now Resorts World. So everything changed, but the whole thing is that that's when, in the 1960s, when you started hearing about the Rat Pack and the Rat Pack playing, their shows there, and then watching Ocean's 11, that's when Vegas turned from the seedy, questionable place, maybe a lot of crime, don't really want to be there, or only want to be there for a little bit of time, to this, what it is now, where it's this vacation mecca, and people just go there and, spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars chasing those dollars, thinking they're going to come back. So that's the Rat Pack. The Rat Pack then, of course, led to the Brat Pack later on down the road. Ocean's 11 leads to this whole Ocean's 11 series with Ocean's 11, 12, 8, 15, 27, whatever it is. But it all started with Sammy, Frank, Dino, Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, and the Rat Pack. So cheers to them. Make sure you go over to daddrinks.com. You can get the recipe for this, although the recipe was pretty easy. Throw some Japanese whiskey and some soda water in a glass, and you got a Japanese highball. And all kinds of merchandise there. So check it out. Remember, Dad Drinks, every pour tells a story. So to Sammy and the Rat Pack. Please hit like and subscribe, and visit daddrinks.com for recipes, merchandise, and more fun stuff.